The trade station called Orion Gate floated quietly in deep space, a giant ring of metal and light where ships from many worlds came and went every day. Many different alien races walked its wide halls, tall warriors with blue skin, small merchants with 4 arms, silent machines that moved like shadows, and among all of them humans were still very new. Many aliens did not respect them yet, because humans were young in the galaxy and had little power, but Daniel Carter did not care much about that. He was a simple human engineer who worked in the lower docking bays where ships often broke and needed repairs. He liked machines more than politics, and he preferred tools over conversations. Most days he quietly fixed engines, repaired power panels, and watched strange alien ships arrive from distant stars. It was not a glamorous job, but it paid enough and it kept him far away from trouble, and Daniel liked it that way. That day began like any other day at the station. Warning lights blinked above the docking bay doors while a long silver ship slowly moved into the port. The ship looked different from most others. Its hull was smooth and dark like polished stone, and strange symbols glowed softly along its surface. The moment the ship locked into place, the entire docking bay became quiet. Several alien workers suddenly stepped aside and whispered to each other. Even the station guards stood straighter than before. Daniel noticed a sudden change and frowned slightly while wiping oil from his hands. Something about that ship made everyone nervous. A moment later, the main ramp of the ship opened with a slow hiss of air. Heavy footsteps echoed inside the metal corridor. Then she appeared. The alien woman stepped down the ramp like someone who feared nothing in the universe. She was taller than most humans. Her long silver hair moved gently behind her. Her eyes glowed faintly violet, and the dark armor she wore looked both elegant and dangerous. Behind her walked 2 armored guards carrying advanced weapons. Many workers quickly lowered their heads and moved away, because everyone on the station knew that armor. It belonged to the Valerian commanders, one of the strongest warrior races in the known galaxy, a species famous for winning wars and destroying entire pirate fleets. Daniel did not know much about alien politics, so instead of staring like everyone else, he simply returned to the broken console he was repairing. The control panel beside the docking clamps had stopped working again, and someone had to fix it. He opened the metal cover and began adjusting the wires, but suddenly he heard footsteps stopping near him. When Daniel looked up, he saw the alien commander standing only a few meters away, her violet eyes watching him with calm curiosity. One of her guards pointed at the broken console and spoke in a sharp alien language. The commander raised her hand slightly, and the guard became silent again. Then she stepped closer to Daniel. The console sparked suddenly, and a small energy module slipped loose from inside the panel. Daniel quickly caught it before it fell to the floor. He studied the small device for a moment and realized it was not broken. It was simply placed the wrong way inside the system. He gently turned the module and placed it back into position. The console lights immediately turned green, and the docking clamps locked perfectly. The alien commander watched everything carefully, her expression calm but interested. Daniel scratched the back of his head and smiled a little. "Well, that was easy," he said casually. Then he looked at her armor and added with a small laugh, "You're amazing, walking in here with everyone acting like the station belongs to you." For a moment, the entire docking bay froze in silence. The nearby workers looked horrified because almost nobody spoke to Valerian commanders so casually, but the alien woman suddenly laughed, a clear, strong laugh that echoed across the metal walls. Her guards looked surprised. The workers looked confused, but the commanders seemed amused. She turned slowly and looked at the crowd of aliens watching them. Then she spoke in a confident voice that carried across the docking bay. "Of course I am amazing," she said proudly. "My husband thinks so too." Then she lifted her hand and pointed directly at Daniel. The entire docking bay became completely silent. Tools stopped moving, machines hummed quietly, and dozens of alien eyes turned toward the confused human engineer standing beside the console. Daniel blinked twice and looked around, thinking she must be joking or pointing at someone behind him. But there was no one there. The whispers started immediately, shocked voices spreading across the bay. Some aliens looked scared. Others looked curious. A few guards quickly activated their communication devices, because if a Valerian commander had publicly chosen a husband, it was not a small matter in galactic culture. Daniel felt his stomach twist with confusion. He opened his mouth to protest, but the commander simply smiled slightly, as if she knew something he did not. Far above them, ships continued arriving and leaving the station, unaware that in one quiet docking bay, a single strange sentence had just changed one human's life forever. And if you enjoy stories about humans surprising the galaxy, gently remember to subscribe to this channel so you do not miss the next adventure, because Daniel Carter had no idea that his simple joke had just placed him in the center of a story far bigger than he could imagine, and somewhere on the station, hidden eyes were already watching the man who had just been called the husband of one of the most dangerous women in the galaxy. The silence in the docking bay did not last long. Whispers quickly spread like small waves across the metal hull. Aliens from different species looked at Daniel with wide eyes, some with curiosity and some with fear. A Valerian commander did not make jokes about bonds or partners. Everyone in the galaxy knew that. Daniel, however, looked completely lost. He stood beside the repaired console with grease still on his hands, while dozens of eyes stared at him, as if he had suddenly become someone very important. He raised his hands slightly and shook his head with an awkward laugh, saying it must be a misunderstanding. But the alien woman did not look like someone who had made a mistake. She stood calm and confident, her violet eyes shining softly under the bright docking lights. Daniel finally found his voice and spoke quietly, trying not to sound disrespectful. He told her that he was sure she meant someone else. He was just a human mechanic who fixed broken panels and loose wires. Nothing more. But the commander only studied him for a moment, as if measuring his reaction. Then she turned toward her guards and gave a short command in her language. The guards immediately stepped back and allowed more space around them. The crowd of workers slowly moved further away, but none of them left, because everyone wanted to hear what would happen next. The commander looked at Daniel again and spoke calmly, introducing herself as Commander Lyra of the Valerian fleet. Her voice carried strength, but also a strange hint of amusement. Daniel nodded politely, although he had heard that name before. Valerian commanders were known across many systems. They protected trade routes and destroyed pirate fleets without mercy. Hearing that name made Daniel even more uncomfortable, because if someone like her had really claimed him as a husband, it could create many serious problems. Daniel quietly tried to explain again that his words earlier were only a joke. He said he meant no disrespect and that humans often compliment people in friendly ways. But Lyra simply crossed her arms and listened, her expression calm, as if she already expected that answer. When he finished, she leaned a little closer and spoke in a softer voice, so only he could hear. She explained that among the Valerian people, public praise from a stranger could sometimes carry deeper meaning, especially when spoken without fear in front of others. It was considered a sign of courage and honesty, two qualities their culture respected greatly. Daniel blinked in confusion because he had never heard of such a rule. He quickly whispered that he did not mean anything like that, and that he certainly did not want to cause diplomatic trouble between species. But Lyra's lips curved into a faint smile. She said the problem was not what he meant, but what everyone else had already heard. And now many witnesses believed a bond had been declared. In galactic society, public statements often carried powerful weight, especially when spoken by someone of her rank. Daniel suddenly noticed something else while the crowd continued whispering nearby. Several unfamiliar aliens standing on the upper walkways were watching him very closely, their faces hidden under dark hoods, and their eyes followed every movement he made. A cold feeling slowly moved through his chest, because it was clear that news about this strange claim was spreading faster than he expected. In a place like Orion Gate, rumors traveled through the station faster than light signals, and rumors connected to powerful warriors could become dangerous very quickly. He looked back at Lyra and asked in a nervous voice why she did not simply correct the misunderstanding in front of everyone. It would solve the problem immediately, but instead of answering right away, she studied the crowd around them, her sharp eyes moving slowly across the watching aliens, as if searching for something hidden among them. Then she leaned closer again and spoke very quietly, her voice almost a whisper. She told Daniel that correcting the statement might actually create more danger than leaving it alone. Daniel frowned deeply because that answer made little sense to him. But before he could ask another question, Lyra straightened again and spoke loudly so the entire docking bay could hear. She announced that her fleet would remain at the station for several days while her ship received supplies and maintenance. And during that time, her husband would remain under her protection. The moment those words left her mouth, the whispers grew louder, and many workers quickly moved away. Nobody wanted to be standing too close to a situation that could attract powerful enemies. Daniel felt his heart beat faster because something about the commander's behavior told him this situation was not just a strange cultural mistake. There was another reason behind it, a reason she was not explaining yet. And judging by the careful way she watched the surrounding crowd, it seemed she expected trouble to appear sooner or later. As the crowd slowly began to break apart, Daniel noticed the hooded aliens on the upper walkway quietly leaving the area. Their movements calm but purposeful, and for some reason that simple detail made the air around him feel colder, because he realized something important. The moment Lyra called him her husband, he had unknowingly stepped into a game of power and danger played by species far stronger than humans. Lyra then turned back toward him and spoke quietly one more time. Her voice calm, but serious now. She told him to stay close to her while they were on the station and to avoid walking alone through the corridors. Daniel asked why, but her answer was short and unsettling. "Because now," she said softly, "many people will start seeing you as the easiest way to reach me." And as Daniel slowly looked around the busy docking bay, filled with strangers from dozens of worlds, he began to understand that his small joke had not only created confusion, it had also painted a target on his back. And somewhere in the shadows of Orion Gate, dangerous minds were already beginning to form plans around the human who had just been publicly claimed by one of the most feared commanders in the galaxy. The docking bay slowly returned to its normal noise after the strange moment passed. Ships hummed, cargo drones moved across the floor, and workers tried to pretend nothing unusual had happened. But the truth was clear to anyone paying attention. The human engineer, named Daniel Carter, was now the center of quiet whispers across Orion Gate Station, and the reason stood only a few steps away from him. Commander Lyra of the Valerian fleet, one of the most feared warrior leaders in known space. Lyra began walking toward the exit corridor of the docking bay with calm confidence, her armored boots echoing against the metal floor. After a moment, she looked back at Daniel, as if expecting him to follow. Daniel hesitated for a second because his mind was still full of confusion, but when he noticed several curious aliens staring at him again, he quickly grabbed his small tool bag and walked after her, feeling as if his quiet life had suddenly been pushed into a story he did not understand. The station corridors outside the docking bay were wide and bright. Long windows showed distant stars shining in endless darkness. Travelers from many planets moved through the halls, speaking different languages, but something unusual happened as Lyra passed them. Many aliens stepped aside immediately. Some lowered their heads in respect, while others avoided eye contact completely. Daniel realized that the commander carried a reputation far larger than he first thought, even the station. Security officers stood straighter when she walked past them. After several minutes, Lyra stopped near a quiet observation deck where the crowd was thinner. The large window behind them showed a beautiful view of Orion Gate floating between distant stars. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel finally broke the silence by rubbing the back of his neck and giving an awkward smile. He said again that he truly did not mean to create trouble earlier. He was only trying to be polite when he complimented her. Humans joked like that all the time. Lyra listened quietly, her violet eyes studying his face carefully as if she was trying to understand something deeper about him. Then she asked him a simple question. She asked why he spoke to her without fear in the docking bay when every other alien there looked terrified. Daniel shrugged slightly and answered honestly. He said he did not know much about Valerian commanders. To him, she simply looked like someone who walked into the room with confidence. And confidence deserved respect, not fear. For the first time, Lyra seemed genuinely surprised by his answer. A faint smile touched her lips again. She explained that her species was raised in a culture where strength decided many things. From childhood, Valerians trained as warriors, They valued courage, direct words, and honesty more than complicated politics. Most alien species treated them carefully because they knew the Valerian fleets were powerful enough to change the balance of entire star systems. But because of that power, people rarely spoke to them honestly, most simply bowed or avoided them completely. Daniel listened carefully while leaning against the window railing, the quiet stars shining behind him. He admitted that humans were still new in the galaxy and did not fully understand every alien tradition yet. Sometimes they simply said what they thought without worrying about complicated meanings. Lyra nodded slowly, as if that explanation confirmed something she had already suspected. She told him that his simple joke earlier had caught her attention because it felt genuine. It showed a kind of fearless honesty she rarely saw in other species. But the calm moment did not last long, because while they spoke, Lyra suddenly became serious again. Her eyes moved toward the far end of the observation deck where a group of travelers stood near another window. They looked like ordinary visitors at first, but the commander's sharp gaze stayed fixed on them for several seconds. Daniel noticed the change in her posture immediately. The relaxed warrior had suddenly become alert, like a predator quietly studying movement in tall grass. She spoke again in a lower voice, explaining something that made Daniel's stomach tighten with concern. She told him that powerful positions in the galaxy always created enemies. Pirates, smugglers, rival clans, and ambitious warlords constantly searched for ways to weaken strong commanders. Sometimes they attacked fleets directly, but other times they chose easier targets connected to those leaders. People who could be captured or used as leverage. Daniel slowly realized where this explanation was leading. He pointed at himself and asked quietly if she meant him. Lyra did not answer immediately, but the silence itself was enough. The truth was becoming clear. The moment she publicly called him her husband, many dangerous minds would start thinking the same thing. If someone wanted to pressure a Valerian commander, capturing the human connected to her might seem like a simple plan. Daniel let out a long breath and looked back through the giant window at the distant stars. His peaceful job fixing machines suddenly felt very far away. He joked weakly that his life had been much simpler yesterday, when the only danger he faced was a broken engine exploding in his face. Lyra actually laughed softly at that comment, but the amusement quickly faded again. She explained something else about Valerian tradition. Once a bond was spoken publicly, it carried great symbolic meaning, even if it began by accident. Denying it immediately could create political weakness because rivals would see hesitation as doubt, and doubt was something powerful leaders could not afford to show, especially while traveling through neutral trade stations filled with spies and opportunists. Daniel turned his head slightly and noticed something that made his chest tighten again. The group of travelers Lyra had been watching earlier were slowly leaving the observation deck, but one of them glanced back toward Daniel before disappearing into the corridor. It was only a quick look, but it carried cold calculation rather than simple curiosity. Lyra noticed it too, her eyes narrowing slightly. Then she spoke in a quiet, calm voice that carried hidden warning. She told Daniel that Orion Gate was a peaceful place on the surface, but many criminal organizations secretly operated within its crowded corridors. Mercenaries and information brokers listened carefully to every rumor. And right now, one particular rumor was spreading very quickly. The story of a human who had somehow become the chosen partner of a Valerian commander. Daniel rubbed his forehead slowly because the situation was beginning to feel like a growing storm. He asked her the most important question still in his mind. If this claim placed him in danger, then why keep it alive instead of ending the rumor immediately? Lyra looked at him for a long, quiet moment before answering. And when she finally spoke, her voice carried a strange mixture of seriousness and curiosity. Because, she said softly, sometimes a rumor can also be a shield. Daniel frowned in confusion, but Lyra continued explaining that in the dangerous politics of space power, often protected what appeared valuable. If enemies believed Daniel truly mattered to her, they might hesitate before acting. They would watch, gather information, and plan carefully rather than attacking blindly. That hesitation could buy time she needed for reasons she had not fully explained yet. Daniel slowly realized something important. This strange situation was not just about culture or misunderstanding. Lyra was playing a careful game. using the rumor like a piece on a giant chessboard. And somehow he had become part of that game without even agreeing to it. Far away, in another part of Orion Gate Station, hidden inside a dark lounge where criminals gathered, several shadowy figures were already discussing the same rumor with great interest. Because if the story was true, then the human engineer named Daniel Carter might soon become the most valuable target on the entire station. And plans were quietly beginning to form around the man who had unknowingly stepped into the dangerous secrets of an alien warrior commander. The next cycle on Orion Gate Station began with quiet tension spreading through the long metal corridors. Rumors had already traveled faster than cargo ships. Merchants whispered about the human who had somehow become the husband of a Valerian commander. Guards spoke about it in low voices, and criminals listened very carefully to every new detail. Because in a place like Orion Gate, information was often more valuable than weapons. And Daniel Carter had unknowingly become the center of that information storm. Daniel himself tried to return to something close to his normal routine, although normal no longer truly existed for him. He spent most of the morning inside the engineering sector, checking docking clamps and power relays. But everywhere he went, people looked at him differently now. Some aliens stared with curiosity. Others quickly moved out of his path, as if standing too close might bring trouble. Even the station security officers seemed unsure how to treat him, because the human mechanic was now connected to one of the most powerful warriors visiting the station. Commander Lyra had warned him earlier to avoid walking alone through the station, but Daniel had never been the type of person who liked hiding behind guards. And after hours of strange attention, he decided to take a short walk through the lower cargo levels to clear his mind. Those halls were usually quiet, filled mostly with storage containers and cargo drones moving between warehouses, far away from the crowded markets and passenger decks. The lights in the cargo sector were dimmer than the rest of the station. Long shadows stretched across the metal floor, while distant machines hummed softly. Daniel walked slowly between tall stacks of shipping crates. Thinking about everything Lyra had told him about enemies and rumors, he still could not fully believe that a simple joke had pushed him into such a complicated situation. But somewhere above those quiet corridors, hidden eyes had been watching him for a long time. Inside a dark maintenance tunnel overlooking the cargo hall, 3 figures waited silently, their armor dark and their faces hidden behind breathing masks. They belonged to a small mercenary group that operated across several systems, hired by anyone who could pay enough credits. Their leader, a tall alien with sharp yellow eyes, studied Daniel through a small scanning device. The machine confirmed the identity they had been searching for. Human male, Daniel Carter, recently connected to Valerian Commander Lyra. The mercenary leader smiled behind his mask, because if the rumors were true, this human could become a powerful bargaining tool. Even if the bond was only political theater, the commander might still hesitate if his life was threatened, and hesitation in war was often worth millions of credits. Below them, Daniel stopped beside a cargo container and checked a small handheld console. He was reviewing repair requests for the docking systems, completely unaware that several weapons were already aimed in his direction from the shadows above. The mercenary leader gave a silent signal. The attack happened quickly and without warning. 2 dark shapes dropped silently from the upper walkway, landing behind Daniel with perfect precision. Before he could even turn around, a heavy arm locked around his shoulders while another attacker pressed a small energy weapon against his side. The weapon did not fire, but the quiet hum told him it was fully charged. "Do not move," a cold voice whispered in broken human language. Daniel froze immediately, his heart pounding in his chest as he realized exactly what Lyra had warned him about. He slowly raised his hands, trying to stay calm while his mind searched for any possible way out of the situation, but the attackers moved with professional speed. A thin metal device was snapped around his wrists, locking his arms behind his back with magnetic force. A third mercenary dropped down from the walkway and walked in front of him. The tall alien with yellow eyes studied Daniel carefully, almost as if he was inspecting a valuable object. "So this is the human," the alien said quietly, his voice carrying cruel amusement. "The one the Valerian commander called her husband." Daniel forced himself to stay calm and answered slowly. explaining that the situation was a misunderstanding. He was just a mechanic and had no real importance to Commander Lyra, but the mercenaries did not seem convinced. The yellow-eyed leader gave a small laugh and shook his head. "Perhaps," he said calmly, "but powerful warriors rarely speak such words in public without reason." Daniel felt a heavy grip push him forward as the attackers forced him deeper into the cargo sector, toward a sealed loading gate where a small, unmarked transport ship waited quietly with its engines already humming. The entire operation had clearly been planned in advance. But Daniel Carter was not completely helpless. He had spent years working with machines and station systems, and during the struggle earlier, something important had happened. One of the attackers had knocked his small engineering tool pack loose from his belt, and the bag had fallen against the side of cargo crate, hidden in shadow where the mercenaries did not notice it. Inside that bag was a tiny repair drone no bigger than a human hand, a simple device used for fixing damaged circuits inside tight spaces. And just before the mercenaries pulled him away, Daniel had quietly tapped a small control button on the wrist console he always carried. Back near the crate, the little drone slowly activated, its tiny lights glowing softly as it lifted into the air and connected silently to the local station network. The machine began transmitting a short coded signal through the maintenance channels, a signal designed for emergency repairs, but now carrying a different message entirely. Across the station inside the command level of her ship, Commander Lyra suddenly paused in the middle of a tactical report, her eyes narrowing slightly as a small alert appeared on her personal console. The signal code was simple but unmistakable, a distress beacon from Daniel's engineering device. For one silent second, the Valerian commander stared at the message. Then the air inside the room changed completely. The calm warrior vanished, and something far more dangerous took her place. "Prepare my ship," Lyra said quietly to her officers, her voice carrying cold fury that made even her experienced crew stand straighter. "Someone has taken what belongs under my protection." Back in the cargo sector, Daniel was forced onto the small transport ship while the mercenaries sealed the ramp behind them. The engines began powering up, ready to leave Orion Gate before station security even realized what had happened. The yellow-eyed leader turned toward Daniel again with a satisfied smile, clearly confident that their plan had succeeded perfectly. But far above the station, the massive dark warship of the Valerian fleet was already beginning to move, its engines glowing brighter as Commander Lyra prepared to hunt. And anyone who truly understood Valerian warriors knew one terrifying truth. When they protected something they considered theirs, they never stopped until it was returned, and the people who dared take it often wished they had chosen a different target. The small transport ship carrying Daniel Carter slipped away from Orion Gate Station like a shadow escaping into darkness, its engines quiet but powerful as it moved toward the open stars. Inside the cargo hold, Daniel sat against a cold metal wall, with magnetic restraints still locked around his wrists. The mercenaries clearly believed the hardest part of their plan was already finished. They spoke among themselves with relaxed confidence, unaware that the simple human mechanic sitting silently in the corner was studying every detail of the ship around him, every sound of the engines, every blinking light on the nearby control panels, because years of repairing machines had trained his mind to notice things most people ignored. The yellow-eyed mercenary leader paced slowly across the cargo bay floor, occasionally glancing at Daniel with a satisfied expression. To him, this mission was almost complete. Soon they would reach a hidden base where their mysterious employer waited, and once the Valerian commander realized her husband had been taken, she might be willing to trade something very valuable to get him back. Perhaps military information, perhaps safe passage through controlled territories, or perhaps something even more important. Daniel, however, understood something those mercenaries did not. Commander Lyra was not the type of warrior who liked negotiations when someone crossed a line. Hours earlier, he had seen the quiet strength in her eyes, and even though their strange connection had started as a misunderstanding, he had a strong feeling that the people who captured him had made a very dangerous mistake. Still, Daniel knew that simply waiting for rescue would not be enough. The mercenaries were experienced criminals, and their ship was already far from the station. So he slowly shifted his body closer to a nearby equipment crate, pretending to be uncomfortable in the restraints while secretly examining the loose maintenance panel beside him. The small metal cover was not fully secured, and inside, he could see part of the ship's secondary wiring system. One of the mercenaries noticed him moving and shouted for him to stay still, but Daniel quickly raised his hands and acted nervous, explaining that the restraints were cutting circulation in his arms. The guard rolled his eyes and ignored him, believing the human was simply scared and harmless. That small moment of distraction was exactly what Daniel needed, because while pretending to adjust his position, he managed to slide a thin multi-tool from inside his sleeve, a simple device he always carried during repair work. The mercenaries had searched him quickly earlier, but they clearly did not understand how creative engineers could be when hiding tools. Carefully keeping his movements slow and natural, Daniel began working the multi-tool against the maintenance panel screws, loosening them one by one while keeping his back turned so the guards could not easily see what he was doing. The engines hummed loudly enough to hide the faint sound of metal shifting, and within minutes the panel came free, exposing a bundle of power conduits glowing softly inside the wall. Daniel did not try to escape his restraints yet. Instead, he did something much smarter. He reached into the wiring and connected two specific circuits together using the metal tip of his tool, a trick he had learned years ago while repairing old cargo ships. A second later, a small warning light appeared on the ship's main console near the mercenary pilot. The engine output suddenly dropped by several percent. Not enough to stop the ship, but enough to trigger a diagnostic alert. The pilot frowned and began checking his instruments, muttering something about unstable power flow. Daniel hid the tool again and leaned back quietly as if nothing had happened. But deep inside the ship's systems, the temporary circuit connection continued sending strange signals through the engine regulators, slowly causing more errors and forcing the pilot to reduce speed while the computer tried to correct the problem. Meanwhile, far across the empty space behind them, another ship was moving with terrifying speed. The massive Valerian warship cut through the darkness like a blade, its engines glowing bright blue while advanced scanners tracked the mercenary transport's signal trail through space. Inside the command bridge, Commander Lyra stood in complete silence while tactical displays showed the enemy vessel ahead. Her violet eyes burned with controlled fury. One of her officers reported that the transport ship had slowed down unexpectedly due to engine irregularities. Lyra's expression did not change, but her voice carried cold satisfaction when she gave the next order: increase speed and prepare boarding teams. Back inside the mercenary transport, the situation was becoming more stressful. Warning alarms began appearing across the pilot's display as the strange power fluctuations continued spreading through the engine systems. The yellow-eyed leader growled with frustration and ordered his crew to check the maintenance corridors, suspecting some hidden mechanical failure. That decision turned out to be their worst mistake. Two mercenaries left the cargo bay to inspect the lower engine compartments, leaving only one guard watching Daniel. The remaining guard leaned against the wall holding his weapon lazily, clearly believing the restrained human could not cause any trouble. Then suddenly the entire ship shook violently. A massive shadow appeared outside the forward viewing window as the Valerian warship arrived, its enormous hull blocking the distant stars like a moving mountain of metal. Before the mercenaries could even react, a powerful energy pulse struck the transport's engines, disabling them instantly without destroying the ship. Emergency lights flashed red across the corridors as the transport drifted helplessly through space. The yellow-eyed leader shouted orders in panic, realizing far too late who had found them. Seconds later, the sound of cutting torches screamed against the outer hull. Daniel looked up slowly, a small smile forming on his face because he recognized that sound immediately. Moments later, the cargo bay ceiling exploded inward as a heavy boarding hatch was torn open. Armored Valerian soldiers dropped into the room like thunder, their weapons firing precise energy bursts that knocked the mercenaries to the ground before they could even aim their guns. The entire battle lasted less than 20 seconds. Then another figure stepped through the smoke and sparks, moving with calm, deadly grace. Commander Lyra walked into the cargo bay, her armor reflecting the red emergency lights while the defeated mercenaries lay unconscious around her. Her glowing eyes scanned the room until they found Daniel sitting against the wall with his restraints still attached. For a moment, the powerful warrior simply stood there, studying him carefully to make sure he was unharmed. Then she stepped closer and sliced the restraints apart with a small energy blade. Daniel slowly stood up and stretched his sore arms while looking around at the destroyed cargo bay. Then he looked back at her with a tired but impressed smile. "I guess," he said quietly, "you really don't like it when someone kidnaps your husband." For a second, Lyra's serious expression held firm. Then a faint, amused smile appeared again. But behind that smile, her eyes still carried the dangerous promise of what would happen to anyone foolish enough to try such a thing again. The cargo bay of the damaged transport ship slowly grew quiet after the short but violent rescue. Red emergency lights continued flashing across the metal walls while Valerian soldiers secured the unconscious mercenaries and checked the ship for hidden threats. The smell of burned circuits filled the air and small sparks still jumped from damaged panels. But in the center of the room, Daniel Carter and Commander Lyra stood facing each other in the middle of the chaos. The moment felt strangely calm after everything that had just happened. Daniel flexed his wrists where the restraints had been cut away and let out a long breath. He was still trying to understand how quickly his life had changed. Less than a day earlier, he had been repairing docking consoles like any normal shift. Now he was standing inside a captured pirate transport ship with one of the most powerful alien commanders in the galaxy personally leading a rescue mission to get him back. The situation felt so unreal that he almost laughed. Lyra, however, did not look amused anymore. The earlier hint of humor in her expression had faded, and now she watched him with quiet seriousness. As if she was thinking carefully about something important, one of her officers approached to report that the mercenary crew had been secured and the ship was under control. She nodded once and ordered them to transfer the prisoners to the Valerian warship waiting outside. Then she told the soldiers to leave the cargo bay. Within a minute, the room became almost silent again. Only the distant sounds of damaged systems echoed through the empty corridors. Daniel leaned against a metal crate and looked at her thoughtfully, his mind still full of questions that had been growing since the strange moment back at Orion Gate Station. After everything that had happened, he felt he deserved some answers, so he finally asked the question that had been bothering him from the beginning. Back on the station, he said slowly, "When you called me your husband in front of everyone, was that really just a misunderstanding?" Lyra did not respond immediately. Instead, she walked slowly toward the broken viewing window of the cargo bay, where distant stars glowed in silent darkness. She stood there for several seconds watching the endless space outside before finally speaking. She explained that in Valerian culture public words carried deep meaning, especially when spoken by someone in command. Traditions from their ancient past were still respected even in modern space travel, and one of those traditions involved recognition of courage. When a Valerian warrior heard someone praise them openly without fear, especially a stranger, it could sometimes be interpreted as a symbolic challenge or bond, depending on the situation. Daniel listened carefully, but still looked confused because that explanation alone did not fully answer his question. He pointed out that she could have corrected the misunderstanding right away in the docking bay. She had plenty of time to simply laugh and explain the cultural difference. Instead, she had repeated the claim publicly and made the situation even more serious. For the first time since the rescue, Lyra turned around slowly and looked directly at him again, her violet eyes calm but thoughtful. "You are correct," she said quietly. "I could have corrected it." The simple answer made Daniel straighten slightly because it confirmed what he had already suspected. The moment had not been an accident after all. She had made a choice. Lyra walked a little closer and rested one armored hand lightly against the side of a damaged control panel, her voice lowering slightly as she continued explaining the truth behind that choice. She told him that before arriving at Orion Gate, her fleet had already received intelligence reports about several criminal groups operating secretly on the station. Some of those groups were known to be searching for ways to challenge Valerian influence in nearby trade systems. Normally, she would simply ignore such rumors, but this time something felt different. Several small signals suggested someone was quietly preparing a larger move against her command, perhaps an attempt to weaken her reputation or force her into political conflict with other factions. Daniel crossed his arms while thinking about the mercenaries who had captured him earlier. The story was beginning to connect in his mind. Lyra continued explaining that when she entered the docking bay, she noticed several suspicious observers watching her arrival very carefully. Individuals who did not behave like ordinary traders or station workers. She believed they were scouts for one of those hidden criminal organizations, waiting for an opportunity to learn something useful about her presence on the station. Then Daniel had spoken to her without fear, making that casual compliment in front of everyone. Instead of ignoring the moment, Lyra had seen a different possibility. By declaring him publicly connected to her, she created a sudden, unexpected situation that forced those hidden enemies to react. If anyone truly planned to challenge her, they would see Daniel as the easiest target, a weak point that might allow them to control her actions. Daniel slowly nodded, because that was exactly what had happened. The mercenaries had taken the bait almost immediately. Yes, Lyra said quietly, reading the understanding in his expression. They acted faster than I expected. Daniel let out a slow breath and shook his head slightly, half impressed and half shocked. He realized that without knowing it, he had become a piece in a much larger strategy. She had used the rumor of their bond like a trap to expose hidden enemies. But one more question still remained in his mind. If that was your plan, he said carefully, then why rescue me personally instead of just sending soldiers? Lyra looked at him silently for a moment before answering. And when she finally spoke, her voice sounded slightly different than before, less like a commander explaining tactics and more like someone speaking honestly. Because she said calmly, during the plan you stopped being just a piece on the board. Daniel blinked in surprise, unsure how to respond to that statement. She explained that while watching him in the docking bay, she had noticed something rare. He spoke directly without fear. He acted quickly when solving problems, and even during the kidnapping he had managed to sabotage the enemy ship. Her officers had already reported the engine malfunction that slowed the transport before the rescue. Those actions were not the behavior of a weak person. They were the actions of someone with courage and intelligence, qualities Valerians respected deeply. In my culture, Lyra continued quietly, such qualities are not ignored. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck again, suddenly feeling strangely awkward under her serious gaze. He joked softly that he was still just a mechanic who fixed broken machines, nothing more heroic than that. For the first time since the rescue, Lyra allowed a faint smile to return to her face, but this time the smile carried something warmer than simple amusement. Perhaps, she said, but sometimes the simplest people surprise the entire galaxy. Outside the broken window, the distant stars continued shining quietly. But far away across several communication networks, news about the failed kidnapping was already spreading rapidly. And with it, the story of the human connected to a Valerian commander was growing larger and more complicated with every retelling. Daniel Carter had started this strange story with a simple joke, but now the truth behind it was becoming far more serious than either of them had expected. And both of them were beginning to realize that the galaxy might not easily forget the unusual bond that had formed between a quiet human engineer and one of the most powerful alien warriors traveling the stars. The damaged mercenary transport was slowly pulled toward the massive Valerian warship like a helpless piece of metal drifting through dark water. Outside the broken cargo bay window, the enormous vessel waited silently, its glowing engines lighting the surrounding space with a cold blue shine. And for Daniel Carter, the view felt almost unreal. Only a short time ago, he had been working in the quiet repair bays of Orion Gate Station. And now, he was watching an alien warship large enough to dominate an entire battle zone arriving to escort him home. Inside the cargo bay, Commander Lyra gave a final order through her communication device, instructing her soldiers to move the captured mercenaries to the holding cells aboard her flagship. The defeated criminals were dragged away one by one, their earlier confidence completely gone now that they understood exactly who they had angered. None of them dared speak while the Valerian warriors escorted them through the breach in the ship's hull, because even the most reckless mercenary knew that Crossing a Valerian commander often ended very badly. Soon the cargo bay grew quiet again, leaving only Daniel and Lyra standing near the damage control panels while the stars drifted slowly outside. The tension of the battle had passed, but a different kind of silence remained between them. The kind that appears when two people realize their lives have just changed direction in ways neither expected. Daniel looked around the ruined ship once more and gave a tired smile. Joking that if his boss back on Orion Gate asked why he missed his work shift, he was not sure how to explain the story. Something about being kidnapped by mercenaries and rescued by a powerful alien commander sounded difficult to write in a normal maintenance report. Lyra watched him quietly for a moment before answering. Her voice calmer now that the danger had passed. She told him that Orion Gate Station had already received official communication from her fleet explaining the incident. The station authorities were grateful that the criminals responsible had been captured before causing more problems in their territory. Daniel raised his eyebrows slightly at that information, because it meant the story was no longer a small rumor inside the station corridors. It had now become an official event recorded in the logs of multiple systems. And if the galaxy loved anything, it was dramatic stories involving powerful figures. Lyra seemed to understand what he was thinking, because she nodded slowly and explained that news about the situation was already spreading through several trade networks. Messages traveled fast between colonies and stations, especially when they involved the Valerian military. Many people would soon hear about the strange human who had somehow become connected to one of their commanders. Daniel let out a quiet sigh and shook his head slightly. He never wanted fame or attention. He simply enjoyed fixing machines and living a peaceful life, but the galaxy clearly had different plans now. After a moment, he asked the question that had been quietly waiting in his mind since their earlier conversation. Now that the mercenaries were captured and the hidden enemies revealed, what would happen to the strange claims she made on the station? Would she finally correct the misunderstanding and allow both of them to return to their normal lives? For several seconds, Lyra did not answer. Instead, she stepped closer to the open section of the hull and looked out toward the distant stars again, her expression thoughtful, as if she was carefully considering many possibilities at once. Finally, she spoke, explaining that in the complex world of interstellar politics, certain stories could not simply disappear once they began spreading. Too many witnesses had already heard her words. Too many systems were now sharing the rumor. And if she suddenly denied everything, it could create confusion or appear like weakness to her rivals, something a Valerian commander could never allow. Daniel nodded slowly, because he understood the logic behind that explanation. Even human politics worked in similar ways sometimes. Reputation and perception could be as powerful as weapons. So, the story stays, he said quietly, more as a statement than a question. Yes, Lyra replied calmly. Daniel crossed his arms and laughed softly under his breath, realizing that meant the entire galaxy might continue believing he was somehow connected to one of the most dangerous warriors traveling through space. A strange future for someone who had never even left the engineering decks before. But Lyra had not finished speaking yet. She turned toward him again and added something unexpected, her voice steady but carrying a small hint of warmth. She said that even if the claim had started as part of a tactical decision, traditions still mattered in Valerian culture, and sometimes the truth behind a symbol could grow stronger over time rather than weaker. Daniel blinked once in confusion, unsure if he understood what she meant. Lyra studied him carefully before continuing, explaining that courage and honesty were qualities her people valued above almost everything else, and during the short time they had known each other, Daniel had already shown both. First in the docking bay, when he spoke without fear, then again during the kidnapping, when he sabotaged the mercenary ship instead of waiting helplessly for rescue. In my culture, she said quietly, such actions earn respect. Daniel felt strangely embarrassed hearing that kind of praise from someone like her. He scratched the back of his neck and joked that most humans would not call what he did bravery. It was simply survival mixed with a bit of engineering creativity. Lyra allowed a small smile to return again, the same amused expression he had seen when they first met. Sometimes survival is the purest form of bravery, she replied. At that moment, the Valerian warship finished connecting to the damaged transport. A long boarding bridge extended across the gap between the vessels, glowing lights guiding the path through the darkness of space. Lyra stepped toward the bridge entrance but paused halfway, turning back toward Daniel one last time. "Well," she said calmly, "it seems the galaxy now believes you are my husband." Daniel looked at the long, glowing bridge leading to the enormous warship waiting outside, then back at the alien commander who had somehow pulled him into this unbelievable adventure. And after a moment, he gave a slow, amused smile. "So," he asked lightly, "are we actually doing this?" For a second, Lyra simply looked at him. Then she laughed again, the same strong, confident laugh that had first echoed through the docking bay on Orion Gate Station. "Perhaps," she said with quiet amusement, extending her hand toward him. "The future will decide." Daniel hesitated only a moment before taking her hand and walking beside her toward the massive Valerian ship, leaving the ruined mercenary transport drifting silently behind them. Far across the galaxy, communication networks were already spreading the unbelievable story, the tale of a human engineer who had become the partner of a powerful alien commander. And while many listeners laughed or doubted the rumor, others began watching with growing curiosity. Because if there was one lesson the universe had learned about humans, it was that they had a strange habit of appearing small at first, only to surprise the entire galaxy later. And somewhere deep inside the endless stars, a new and unexpected story between two very different worlds was only just beginning. Finally, she spoke, explaining that in the complex world of interstellar politics, certain stories could not simply disappear once they began spreading. Too many witnesses had already heard her words. Too many systems were now sharing the rumor. And if she suddenly denied everything, it could create confusion or appear like weakness to her rivals, something a Valerian commander could never allow. Daniel nodded slowly, because he understood the logic behind that explanation. Even human politics worked in similar ways sometimes. Reputation and perception could be as powerful as weapons. "So, the story stays," he said quietly, more as a statement than a question. "Yes," Lyra replied calmly. Daniel crossed his arms and laughed softly under his breath, realizing that meant the entire galaxy might continue believing he was somehow connected to one of the most dangerous warriors traveling through space. A strange future for someone who had never even left the engineering decks before. But Lyra had not finished speaking yet. She turned toward him again and added something unexpected, her voice steady but carrying a small hint of warmth. She said that even if the claim had started as part of a tactical decision, traditions still mattered in Valerian culture, and sometimes the truth behind a symbol could grow stronger over time rather than weaker. Daniel blinked once in confusion, unsure if he understood what she meant. Lyra studied him carefully before continuing, explaining that courage and honesty were qualities her people valued above almost everything else. And during the short time they had known each other, Daniel had already shown both. First in the docking bay, when he spoke without fear, then again during the kidnapping, when he sabotaged the mercenary ship instead of waiting helplessly for rescue. "In my culture," she said quietly, "such actions earn respect." Daniel felt strangely embarrassed hearing that kind of praise from someone like her. He scratched the back of his neck and joked that most humans would not call what he did bravery. It was simply survival mixed with a bit of engineering creativity. Lyra allowed a small smile to return again, the same amused expression he had seen when they first met. "Sometimes survival is the purest form of bravery," she replied. At that moment, the Valerian warship finished connecting to the damaged transport. A long boarding bridge extended across the gap between the vessels, glowing lights guiding the path through the darkness of space. Lyra stepped toward the bridge entrance but paused halfway, turning back toward Daniel one last time. "Well," she said calmly, "it seems the galaxy now believes you are my husband." Daniel looked at the long, glowing bridge leading to the enormous warship waiting outside, then back at the alien commander who had somehow pulled him into this unbelievable adventure. And after a moment, he gave a slow, amused smile. "So," he asked lightly, "are we actually doing this?" For a second, Lyra simply looked at him. Then she laughed again, the same strong, confident laugh that had first echoed through the docking bay on Orion Gate Station. "Perhaps," she said with quiet amusement, extending her hand toward him. The future will decide. Daniel hesitated only a moment before taking her hand and walking beside her toward the massive Valerian ship, leaving the ruined mercenary transport drifting silently behind them. Far across the galaxy, communication networks were already spreading the unbelievable story. The tale of a human engineer who had become the partner of a powerful alien commander, and while many listeners laughed or doubted the rumor, others began watching with growing curiosity. Because if there was one lesson the universe had learned about humans, it was that they had a strange